The release of Dune Part 2 might have you feeling more lost than a kangaroo mouse in the desert, but fear not, here's everything you need to know about the history of Arrakis. Several decades before the events of the Dune movies, Emperor Shaddam Corrino IV charges the ruthless members of House Harkonnen with maintaining the production of the valuable resource known as spice, which is only found on Arrakis. This vast desert planet is inhabited primarily by large sandworms and a proud rebellious people called the Fremen.
Little else is known of the Fremen, except that they are dangerous and unreliable.
Though this station makes the Harkonnens unimaginably rich and powerful, their brutal occupation of the planet brings them into conflict with formidable Fremen fighters, resulting in years of costly asymmetrical guerrilla warfare. During the opening moments of Dune Part 1, Chani explains that the Harkonnens arrived on Arrakis long before she was born, which in the books is somewhere between the year 10,174 and 10,177, depending on who's writing. Paul Atreides reiterates this in Dune Part 2, though he states that the Fremen have only been fighting the Harkonnens for decades. This likely means that their arrival on Arrakis took place after 10,100, with the books detailing instances of Harkonnen-Fremen violence as early as 10,150. Dune Part 2 boasts an Empire Strikes Back-style twist in the revelation that Paul and Lady Jessica are actually part of the Harkonnen bloodline. This is because, more than 30 years before Dune Part 1, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen and an unknown mate gave birth to Jessica. In the appendices of the Dune novel, it is stated that Jessica was born in the year 10,154, which would make her 37 years old during the events of Part 1. In the prequel series of Dune books, which were written by his son Brian and sci-fi novelist Kevin J. Anderson, it is revealed that Jessica's mother is none other than Gaius Helen Mohiam, the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit. It's a rather bleak and disturbing plotline that probably isn't worth getting into here, partly because it may or may not be canon in the film universe. After all, nobody is sure how comfortable the filmmakers might be in regards to ideas coming from outside Frank Herbert's original books. That said, Brian Herbert insists that his father outlined the specific details of Jessica's parentage before his death in 1986. As part of the Bene Gesserit's strict and highly calculated breeding plans, Jessica is tasked with conceiving a female child with Duke Leto Atreides, the future ruler of the planet Caladan and leader of House Atreides. The ultimate goal is for Jessica and Leto's prospective daughter to marry a son from House Harkonnen, ending the bitter feud between the houses for good. This couple would then sire a son who would become both the Padishah Emperor and the omniscient messianic figure known as the Kwisatz Haderach. He'd also be carefully groomed by the Bene Gesserit, promising unique advantages to the secretive order. Because this union was strictly designed for the purposes of producing offspring for prophecies and politics, Leto opts not to marry Jessica. Essentially, he hopes that he can still wed a more politically advantageous partner down the road. But Jessica and Leto fall in love and she ultimately becomes pregnant with a baby boy, much to the dismay of the Bene Gesserit. Leto, on the other hand, is overjoyed to sire an heir and continue his bloodline. Around the year 10,175, Paul Atreides is born, placing him in the mid to late teens by the start of Dune Part 1. At this point, however, neither Leto nor Jessica are aware that their union has intertwined the houses Harkonnen and Atreides, producing a child with a lineage as powerful as it is volatile. In a not-so-subtle beginning to a callous political power play, Emperor Shaddam IV suddenly orders House Harkonnen to leave Arrakis, subsequently transferring their power to House Atreides. Baron Harkonnen understands that this is only a temporary measure to instigate the swift defeat of the largest threat to his and the Emperor's power, while Leto himself is suspicious of the gift even as he accepts it. The strongest motivation for the latter to accept this station, beyond the compulsory nature of an imperial command, is his desire to forge a lasting peace with the Fremen.
Here on Caladan, we've ruled by air power and sea power. On Arrakis, we need to cultivate desert power.
The first phase of this transfer of power is the dispatching of an advanced military team meant to secure the planet for the arrival of House Atreides. Leading the advanced team is Duncan Idaho, a swashbuckling weapons master and close friend and mentor to Paul. Having experienced vivid dreams of Duncan being slain on Arrakis, Paul begs Duncan to bring him to the planet as well, but Duncan refuses. Already living on Arrakis is Imperial planetologist Dr. Liet Kynes, who has spent many years developing a relationship with the Fremen. Leto is told that Dr. Kynes will oversee the transition of power from House Harkonnen to House Atreides. Despite their anger at his birth, the Bene Gesserit have all but resigned themselves to accept Paul as the potential Kwisatz Haderach. Before they can even entertain him as their savior/ward, however, Reverend Mother Mohiam needs to perform the so-called Test of Humanity, a sacred rite in which the outcome can only be life or certain death. In a dark room, Paul is instructed to place his hand in a box, knowing that it will cause him immense and indescribable pain. Should he recoil and attempt to remove his hand from the box, Mohiam will prick his neck with a poisonous needle referred to as the Gom Jabbar. Paul manages to withstand the agony for the full duration of the test, instantly earning the serious attention of the Bene Gesserit. Around this time, he also begins having visions of a young blue-eyed woman on Arrakis. Unbeknownst to Paul and his mother, Mohiam is in league with the Harkonnens and is fully aware of their impending coup attempt. As a result of Paul's performance during the test, she asks Baron Harkonnen to spare him and Jessica in the coming assault. The Baron agrees, using a technicality to lie to her. In reality, he fully intends to destroy House Atreides for good.
My Arrakis. My Dune.
With everything finally in order, the Atreides make their way to Arrakis, but Duke Leto's aspirations for progress and prosperity are quickly dampened by the state of their gear, which has been sabotaged almost beyond repair by the Harkonnens. Leto arranges for himself, Paul, and Paul's other mentor, Gurney Halleck, to meet with Dr. Kynes and Duncan's Fremen ally, Stilgar. Stilgar is the Naib of Sietch Tabr, a vibrant rural Fremen community far from the Atreides' new home in the planet's capital, Arrakis. The group later ventures out to a spice mining operation where they witness faulty equipment that is unable to extract workers before a sandworm attack. Though they narrowly escape, Leto starts to suspect that his team is being set up to fail. Tensions reach a new peak when Paul is nearly assassinated by a rogue Harkonnen agent not long afterward. Increasingly certain that Emperor Shaddam is plotting against him, Duke Leto begs Lady Jessica and the Bene Gesserit to protect Paul if he dies. Notably, before or around this time, Leto unknowingly impregnated Jessica with a second child. Leto's worst fears about the Harkonnens are realized that night when he's betrayed by the Atreides family physician Dr. Wellington Yue, whose wife is being held and tortured by the Harkonnens. Having immobilized Leto's body with a paralytic, Yue plans to deliver him to Baron Harkonnen in exchange for his wife's safety. However, he replaces one of Leto's teeth with a poisonous capsule, granting Leto the chance to enact vengeance against the Baron by way of murder-suicide. Led by the Baron's nephew, Count Glossu Rabban, and aided by the Emperor's elite Sardaukar troops, the Harkonnen forces descend on Arrakis, slaughtering most of the Atreides troops and capturing Paul and Lady Jessica. Meanwhile, Duke Leto is stripped and positioned for slaughter in front of the Baron. Before any blood is spilt, Dr. Yue demands that Baron Harkonnen fulfill his end of their agreement by reuniting him with his wife. In a predictably cruel twist, the Baron honors his word by killing Yue on the spot.
Sojourner.
Baron Harkonnen then leans in close to Leto, humiliating him as he prepares to execute his rival. Leto bites down on the capsule, filling the room with a faint green gas that penetrates the personal shields worn by the Baron and his staff. Though he is able to survive the assassination attempt by floating himself to the ceiling, Harkonnen's lungs are permanently damaged, and he will require a complex breathing apparatus for the rest of his painful life. Leto himself dies almost instantly after inhaling the gas, as do the Baron's closest advisors, including his personal mentat, Piter de Vries. Per his agreement with Reverend Mother Mohiam, Baron Harkonnen had instructed his forces not to outright kill Paul or Lady Jessica. However, he finds a loophole in the deal by having them cast into the desert and left for dead, jeopardizing both the Atreides bloodline and the coming of the Kwisatz Haderach. But during their captive flight above the dunes of Arrakis, Paul manages to use the Bene Gesserit voice, forcing their captors to remove their restraints. Jessica eliminates the Harkonnen guards before escaping the craft with her son, as the two of them set out to survive the night in the dangerous environment. Fortunately, in addition to the poison pill, Dr. Yue sought to ease his conscience by sneaking supplies into Jessica and Paul's packs. During their first night in the desert, Paul is awakened by a visceral, spice-induced vision of the future. Enraged and horrified, he claims to have seen a vengeful holy war fought in his name, one that will claim countless lives across the universe. With the coup successful, Baron Harkonnen begins re-establishing his grip on Arrakis. One of his decisions is bestowing the title of Planetary Governor of Arrakis upon his nephew Rabban. Essentially, this grants him near full control of the planet's mining operations and, most importantly, gives him the responsibility of crushing any Fremen resistance to the Harkonnens' occupation.
And the Fremen. Kill them all.
Baron Harkonnen also needs Rabban to ensure that the totality of the Atreides legions on Arrakis is exterminated, as the Emperor can't risk the other great houses learning that he personally aided the Harkonnens' massacre of them. While Rabban is largely successful in this goal, Paul, Jessica, Duncan, and Gurney have all managed to escape the fighting for now. As revealed later, Gurney manages to spirit a few Atreides survivors off-world before joining a band of roving spice smugglers. In the desert, Paul and Jessica are rescued by Duncan and Dr. Kynes, both of whom are very familiar with the dunes of Arrakis. The 4 survivors regroup at a research station where they evaluate the dire consequences of what the Emperor and the Harkonnens have started. Ever the diplomat, Paul vows to survive so that he can bring this betrayal to light and avenge his father's death, but also states that he will marry the Emperor's daughter, Princess Irulan Corrino, as a means of ensuring peace between the two houses. He also predicts that the great houses will be so outraged by the Emperor's brazen assassination of their family that a chaotic power struggle will ensue, unless what remains of House Atreides unites with House Corrino to begin a new regime. Just as they catch their breath, the Sardaukar discover the group's hiding spot and attack. Desperate to help Paul escape, Duncan places himself between the fighters and his former ward, bringing to life the exact vision of his death Paul had before they left for Arrakis. Though he and his mother flee, Dr. Kynes is grievously wounded by Sardaukar troops. Before she can be executed, however, she calls a sandworm to swallow the Sardaukar squad, along with herself. Fleeing from the Sardaukar through the endless desert, Paul and his mother encounter Stilgar with a small group of Fremen fighters. Lady Jessica begs them for help escaping the planet, but Stilgar refuses. Seeing as their family, power, and spice operation are all in shambles, Stilgar agrees to adopt Paul and teach him the ways of the Fremen. However, he also decides Jessica is only useful as a source of water. While Jessica manages to change Stilgar's mind by threatening his life, one of the Fremen, a skilled fighter named Jameis, still wants to leave the pair in the desert. Paul subsequently fights and kills Jameis in ritual combat, unwittingly fueling Stilgar's growing belief that Paul is a prophetic religious figure known as the Lisan al-Gaib. During this encounter, Paul meets the young woman from his visions, a Fremen warrior named Chani. She shows little interest in him, but is impressed by his fighting abilities. After killing Jameis in single combat, Paul and Jessica are offered safe passage off Arrakis by Stilgar. Jessica hopes that once home in Caladan, they can rally their forces and reveal the Emperor's plot. However, Paul refuses this offer, much to Jessica's dismay, and insists that they be taken to Sietch Tabr to live among the Fremen. Seeing as Duke Leto, his father, believed in an everlasting alliance with the Fremen, Paul is determined to see this through and help the people of Arrakis liberate themselves from the grip of the Harkonnens.
My road leads into the desert.
This is where Dune Part 1 begins to bleed into Dune Part 2, with one of the biggest timeline-related changes made from the novel. The events of the first book, from House Atreides landing on Arrakis to the climax of the Fremen's battle with the Imperium, take place over the course of 3 years. In Denis Villeneuve's films, all of this happens in the year 10,191, as confirmed in Princess Irulan's diary entry at the opening of Part 2. Though fans may take exception to some of the other differences between Part 2 and Frank Herbert's original narrative, this change arguably helps streamline the narrative, making for a more energetic second half to the story. After a minor scrape with some wandering Harkonnen troops, Paul and Jessica finally arrive at Sietch Tabr. Here, Stilgar shares his suspicions about Paul's sacred destiny with Jessica and makes a weighty request of her. Stilgar informs Jessica that the Fremen's own Reverend Mother is almost ready to die. As a result, they are in need of a new Reverend Mother to inherit centuries' worth of painful memories and guide the spiritual movements of the Fremen. Jessica is hesitant both because of the agony she will be forced to endure and because she personally knows that the Fremen religion was largely instilled by the Bene Gesserit. Some of the Fremen, such as Chani and her friend Shishakli, sense this as well, renouncing Stilgar's faith as obsolete. Despite her hesitations, Stilgar forces Jessica to undergo the ritual under threat of death. She drinks the water of life, liquid extracted from a dead sandworm, and survives, which Stilgar believes confirms her and Paul's place in the prophecy. Paul dismisses this and reveals that the Bene Gesserit have trained to survive such trials for centuries. He renounces the prophecy and asks to be trained in the ways of the Fremen as a fighter rather than a leader so that he can take part in their liberation from the Harkonnens. This earns him Chani's respect. As Jessica recovers, she begins to behave strangely. This is due in large part to the elixir awakening the consciousness of her unborn baby, who begins advising Jessica on how to help Paul rise as the Lisan al-Gaib. Jessica, seeking to further establish Paul as the messianic Lisan al-Gaib, starts holding services for believers and begins to convert non-believers gradually. Meanwhile, Paul sincerely tries to become one with the Fremen. He risks his life to help disrupt the Harkonnens' mining operations, survives on his own in the desert, learns their language and the ways of the Feyd-Rautha warriors, and even succeeds in riding a great-grandfather sandworm. As a consequence of his genuine effort and skill, Paul is fully embraced by the Fremen, believers and non-believers alike. Stilgar grants him the Fremen name Usul, which loosely translates to strong in the Fremen language. Paul is then asked to choose a Feyd-Rautha warrior name to be used in combat. He chooses Muad'Dib, the name of a mouse-like creature that scurries across the sands of Arrakis. The Fremen embrace the newly christened Paul Usul Muad'Dib one by one, with Chani lingering longer than the rest. Not long after, they share a kiss and begin a romantic relationship.
I'd very much like to be equal to you.
Paul and the Feyd-Rautha continue to devastate the Harkonnen spice mining operation, forcing Rabban to grow more erratic, which in turn lessens his reputation among his subordinates. This eventually leads Baron Harkonnen to lose faith in Rabban, and he begins looking at another relative to be his successor, his other nephew, Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen. At this point, the Bene Gesserit are also watching Feyd very closely. As they presently believe Paul to be dead, they begin the process of vetting Feyd as the new Kwisatz Haderach. Reverend Mother Mohiam sends Lady Margot Fenring to the Harkonnen homeworld of Gedi Prime, where she personally witnesses Feyd single-handedly slay 3 prisoners as part of a celebratory gladiator contest in honor of his birthday. The Baron grants Feyd the title of planetary governor of Arrakis, after which he encounters Margot. She brings Feyd into a secluded chamber where they perform the Gom Jabbar test of humanity and subsequently conceive a child, all according to the machinations of Reverend Mother Mohiam. During a raid on a spice mining vehicle, Paul reunites with Gurney Halleck. Since the coup at Arrakis, Gurney has been secretly living and working with a crew of independent spice smugglers, hoping to one day gain vengeance on the Harkonnens. Paul welcomes Gurney into the Fremen tribe, though Chani is skeptical of how this old friend might affect her new lover. Paul has been having dreams in which he voyages southward toward the more religiously inclined Fremen fundamentalists. In these dreams, he sees himself leading a fanatical army of believers into a genocidal holy war. As a consequence, Paul refuses to venture to the south of Arrakis, even as his mother does so in an attempt to rally more believers behind the prophecy. Though Chani is unconvinced that the man she loves could be capable of what he sees in his dreams, she grows concerned that Gurney's vengeful ambitions could influence him. This fear is exacerbated by the revelation that Duke Leto had the nuclear stockpile of House Atreides safely hidden on Arrakis. Gurney leads Paul and the Fremen there and urges him to use the firepower to liberate the Fremen and destroy the Harkonnens. Feyd-Rautha arrives on Arrakis and takes command of the Harkonnen counterinsurgency operation, overpowering Rabban and literally forcing him to kiss his boots.
Kiss or die.
Feyd's strategy for conquest is even more brutal than that of his predecessor. He almost immediately launches a full-scale firebombing attack on Sietch Tabr, slaughtering its inhabitants. Shishakli is taken captive but refuses to provide any information about the Fremen's movements. Feyd, who is mostly unbothered by this, burns her to death. Paul, Stilgar, Chani, and a majority of the Feyd-Rautha are away at the time of the attack and arrive home to find nothing but corpses and destruction. Enraged and distraught, the Fremen decide to travel southward and join forces with the rest of their people. Paul initially tries to stay behind on his own, still afraid that the journey will set his terrible visions in motion. Chani quells his fears, however, and convinces him to join her in the south. In the south, Jessica plots to have Paul ingest the water of life at the behest of her unborn daughter. It is commonly known that the ritual is fatal to males, but Jessica believes Paul is destined to survive. Once he arrives, Paul feels the responsibility to drink and does so, rendering him unconscious. A furious Chani finds him comatose and lashes out at Stilgar and Jessica for using him as an instrument in their misguided faith. Jessica, however, believes Chani to be an important part of the prophecy as well. She uses the voice to compel Chani into saving Paul, which she does by mixing her tears and the water of life for Paul to drink. Paul instantly recovers from his coma, effectively confirming the veracity of the prophecy to almost everyone who witnesses. Paul experiences an influx of revelations, including the fact that he and his mother are Harkonnens. He now believes he must lead the Fremen against the Harkonnens and the Imperium, and presents himself to the Fremen as the Lisan al-Gaib. They embrace him as their leader and prepare for war. After months of speculation over whether or not he's still alive, Paul sends a letter to the Emperor confirming that he has survived the coup and challenging him to combat on Arrakis. The Emperor agrees, traveling to the planet with a mighty force of Sardaukar troops. Upon arrival, he meets with the Harkonnens and chastises them for not dealing with Paul and his mother. During their conversation on the Emperor's spacecraft, Paul ambushes their forces and launches a nuclear missile strike. The Harkonnens and the Sardaukar are overwhelmed by the Fremen's military might, which includes the Atreides atomics and a fleet of sandworms. Paul has also strategically chosen to strike during a large sandstorm, which neither the Harkonnens nor the Emperor know how to properly deal with. In the midst of the ensuing battle, Gurney corners Rabban and quickly slays him in single combat. Paul and his forces enter the Emperor's spacecraft, greatly outnumbering the remaining troops on board. Despite suffering damage to his breathing apparatus, Baron Harkonnen attempts to crawl his way up to the Emperor's briefly vacant Golden Lion throne. When Paul arrives and witnesses this, he ascends the steps and plunges a blade into the Baron, revealing to his defeated foe in his dying moments that he has been murdered by his own grandson. Paul then challenges the Emperor for the throne, but the Emperor chooses a champion to fight in his place, as is his right. To that end, Shaddam enlists the help of Feyd-Rautha.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
During their duel, Paul and Feyd are relatively evenly matched, though Feyd gains the upper hand through particularly vicious means. He taunts Paul by insinuating that he means to harm Chani after killing him, then stabs Paul in the gut. Before Feyd can land the killing blow, however, Paul intercepts Feyd's knife with his bare hands. While Feyd is momentarily distracted trying to force the knife into Paul, Paul removes the other knife from his gut and stabs Feyd with it, killing him. Paul has killed the Emperor's champion and earned the right to ascend as his replacement. But before he can execute Shaddam, Princess Irulan asks that Paul spare her father. In return, she will be his willing bride, and the two can end the coming conflict before it begins. Paul agrees, upsetting Chani by both betraying her heart and giving in to his newfound desire for power. The room, Shaddam and Irulan included, bow to Paul, but Chani refuses to do so. Meanwhile, ships from the other great houses have arrived in orbit above Arrakis, aware that an existential conflict is taking place. Gurney stops them from interrupting Paul and Feyd's duel by threatening to nuke Arrakis' spice fields. However, even though Paul has successfully defeated the Emperor, the great houses refuse to acknowledge him as their ruler. As Chani flees Arrakeen and calls a sandworm, Paul commands his forces to launch an all-out attack on the other houses, sparking the very holy war he once sought to avoid. In the books, there is a 12-year time jump from this moment at the end of Dune to its sequel, Dune Messiah. Between the first two books, Paul indeed leads a holy war against his enemies, becoming the most powerful emperor in history and a godlike messiah to the most dangerous army the universe has ever known. Of course, any fan of the Dune franchise will tell you that this isn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot.